country. Regarding the thorny matter of driving under the influence of cannabis, as with the issue of going to work in the state, we must be very clear and base ourselves on our laws regarding alcohol. In these areas, legislation must be clear and firm to support those who will be responsible for enforcing it. Furthermore, these people must have the tools and the training to carry out their mandate. The matter of authorized consumption sites will also be crucial, and I trust that the study currently underway on C-46 will do the same thing for impaired driving. We will have the obligation to review in a few years how well we have reached our goals set out by the Act. To do so, the indicators must be very clear. The percentage of Canadians who use cannabis, the number of offenses, the number of accidents on our roads. I urge our public and private institutions to be diligent in collecting data. This information will be particularly valuable in verifying if the goals of the bill have been reached. To conclude, Canada is about to take a significant step in the area of public policy. We must not be afraid of responsibly stating if some aspects of legalization, as voted on, do not happen as intended, if some aspects of the bill, especially in the area of youth protection, don't reach the goals set out. Our mandate here in this chamber is to do our best by seriously analyzing all aspects of this very important bill to take the best possible decisions in the best interest of Canadians. I sincerely hope, to conclude, that the personal, corporate, and partisan interests of senators will not interfere with our exchanges, which will be critical for the future of our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Forêt, would you accept a question? With pleasure. Thank you, Senator Forêt. Since you've been the president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities in Quebec, given your municipal experience, in the Ottawa Citizen of this morning, the Chief of Police of Ottawa, Mr. Bordelot, said that for the Ottawa Police Force alone, it would cost $6.2 million to the Ottawa Police in the first year of legalization of cannabis. If we project the costs on all municipalities in Canada, it seems that the amount required by municipal police forces to implement Bill C-45 and Bill C-46 will go well beyond the 75% of what the government will collect through the tax on cannabis products sold legally in different stores or points of sale and distribution. At the Federation of Municipalities, did you have the opportunity to evaluate the overall impact that the bill will have on municipal budgets in terms of the cost imposed on police forces through this bill? Senator Forêt, thank you for your question. I was chair of the Union of Quebec Municipalities, which represents about 80% of Quebec's population. But the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is an excellent organization as well. We didn't assess the impact at the time. From experience, I can tell you that it's clear that on a daily basis, the issue of enforcing the rules surrounding the legalization of cannabis will be done by municipalities. That's without a doubt. A first step has been taken, and that's significant, when Minister Morneau decided to give not 50% to the provinces, but 75%. But history indicates that generally, when it goes to the provinces, it doesn't automatically go to municipalities, which will be dealing with this on a daily basis.
And I would say that to answer your question, there's no evaluation. There are clearly significant costs that will result from training, and the work that these police forces that will have to do, and they'll have to absorb this, but the financial support for municipalities is from property tax, which is completely outdated and doesn't allow us to manage an issue as important as regulating cannabis. Given the Honourable Senator's previous experience in the municipal sector, could he inquire among his former colleagues to find out what type of reasonable projection there might be? Because the true costs of the enforcement of the Act will be felt by taxpayers in the municipalities through property tax, and the elastic margin is very limited, and we saw this in the City of Montreal recently. Senator, your time has lapsed. Would you like another 5 minutes? Yes. Are you in agreement, honourable colleagues? Very quickly, Senator, could you please come back to us with numbers that give the scope of what we're talking about here? Because in practice, I get the impression that we have no hard data that has been put before us that would allow us to properly understand the financial impact of this bill on police forces who are responsible for applying it. Senator Faré. Yes, I would be pleased to consult my former colleagues. I imagine that there must have been some kind of assessment of the issues at hand. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Moncion. Did you want to ask a question? Currently, marijuana is not legal, and police forces are already trained for it. So the additional costs that are predicted are for what exactly? Marijuana is not currently legal. Often it's not just municipal police forces that intervene, also provincial police and the RCMP. They will need equipment to verify whether there has been marijuana use in cases of impaired driving. There are few trained staff members. All police forces have said that the training is an important issue. They need to acquire the necessary equipment.
Thank you, Your Honor. Colleagues, I rise today to contribute to our debate on C-45, more specifically known as the newly envisioned Cannabis Act. And I want to thank everyone today that I've listened to on debate and for raising very important issues that perhaps many of us haven't thought about. And it gives a great floor to show the Senate and how we can respond and debate civilly and try to get through what we're doing with this legislation. So I thank you all for that. My job as a senator is to represent the people of New Brunswick. One of the best ways I can do that is to reflect concerns raised in New Brunswick and how they complement my own misgivings as a senator and former health professional about this cannabis legislation. New Brunswick's provincial government has noted they support Ottawa's approach, but in their consultations and in my own meetings with municipal politicians, I think there are some problem areas that must be closely examined, since by all indications, this is being forced too quickly on the provinces. New Brunswick's Legislative Assembly struck a cannabis committee to consult with New Brunswickers during the summer of 2017. The committee reported back in September and noted the provincial government does not have a choice as far as this legislation is concerned. The report states, provinces without a retailer and distribution model will not gain any revenues from the legalization of recreational cannabis, but will still remain responsible for cannabis-related public health and safety. And I remind you, this is 2017. It is thus no surprise, as Minister Petitpas-Taylor noted in her appearance before the Committee of the Whole, the provinces have been urging the federal government to give them more time. The concern is not new. The Saskatchewan Ministry of Justice appeared before the Commons Health Committee in the fall and noted that the rush has been forced upon them. We must go outside our normal practice rules in order to meet the July 2018 deadline. Although we are doing our best to do so, there are no guarantees we will be able to meet the federal deadline. Having 12 to 18 months post-royal assent would have been an easily attainable date, a more easily obtainable date. There are a lot of responsibilities that the federal government has put on our provincial plates and not a lot of time in which to get ready. Time for appropriate regulation is a critical factor we consider in what we're actually doing. We're putting a harmful product in people's hands and giving them the impression that this is safe to consume. Legalization is ultimately permission, no matter what the government says about its education plans. At the practice level, as in the Canadian Association for Pharmacy Distribution Management notes, Colorado has had legal cannabis for 3 years and is now only properly able to address demand. Nevada legalized cannabis in July, but due to poor planning, they ran out in less than 2 weeks and had to look at emergency measures for supply. Canadians do expect better, and we do not want this U.S. experience to become the Canadian experience as we approach legalization. Our police nationwide reflect these concerns. Police forces will simply not be ready in time. I've heard this from municipal politicians in New Brunswick who are already dealing with local police forces that are struggling with heavy budgetary constraints. Vast swaths of New Brunswick are already totally reliant on the RCMP, who are stretched thin and in desperate need of expanded resources and training if they are expected to internally manage these extra responsibilities. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police echoed these concerns in a written submission to the House of Commons Health Committee. The brief notes Canadian Police Services will not be equipped to provide officers with the training and resources necessary to enforce the new regime within the completed time frame. The rush with which the government has moved this bill forward is compounded by the regulatory confusion that is building across the industry. As Ottawa lawyer Tina Fraser notes in an Ottawa Citizen piece, someone should invent an app called Am I Breaking the Law to help Canadians navigate the confusion when cannabis becomes legal. Fraser points out there are no two provinces taking the same legislative and regulatory approach. In other words, it's difficult for people to understand how they are supposed to obtain and use this product without breaking the law. The confusion has become so great that it extends beyond cannabis into the hemp industry. As Senator Griffith has noted, C-45 may have broad implications for the cultivation of hemp. The government has no proposed draft regulations available. How will the industry know what the regulations are until they become law? How will law enforcement and regulators distinguish between legal hemp and legitimate cannabis grown inside and illegal cannabis grown outdoors? I ask you again, how are we going to know this? One of the key arguments proposed for pursuing such aggressive legalization schedules are decades of reports on record recommending legalization or decriminalization. Senator Dean specifically referred to the 1969-1972 Ledane Commission, the 2002 Senate Special Committee on Illegal Drugs, and of course the most recent 2016 Task Force on Cannabis Legalization and Regulation. The Ledane Commission is the most exhaustive review of cannabis prohibition that has likely ever been done. The Commission traveled more than 80,000 kilometers, held hearings in 27 cities and 23 universities, but more importantly, it did a systemic review of all known scientific literature related to cannabis use at the time. The Commission stopped short of recommending full legalization that we are contemplating now, but nevertheless strongly recommended decriminalization. One has to consider why then Pierre Trudeau never acted on the Commission's recommendation and why its work was shelved for more than 30 years. We can only speculate, but perhaps the answer lies in the research the Commission uncovered. At the very time, little was known about cannabis and its effects. However, the final report noted clinicians pointing to the link between chronic cannabis use and mental disorders like schizophrenia. Even then, the commissioners were able to note that cannabis has, in all probability, a harmful effect on the maturing process. That's 30 years ago. The Ledane Commission was not the only government effort to comprehensively study cannabis at the time. In the United States, the Nixon administration's Schaefer Commission made a clear statement on how these reports over the years should be viewed. The media, prominent politicians, educators, and religious leaders have interpreted this report as conveying the sense that cannabis is harmless. Careful reading, however, of the report indicates that the Commission does not recommend the legalization of cannabis. We believe, on the contrary, that the untoward social and medical effects of cannabis reported by the Cannabis Commission and in the past and present medical literature do not justify the legalization of cannabis anywhere in the world. The impact of this statement is compounded by the fact that cannabis has changed dramatically in the 40-plus years since those commissions presented their reports. As the Canadian Medical Association noted before the House of Commons Health Committee, the potency of cannabis has increased tenfold since the early 1980s. We know that cannabis may not be safe to consume. The Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, Canada's only agency with a legislative mandate to reduce the harms of drugs on Canadians, notes. Cannabis use affects the prefrontal cortex, which continues to develop into the mid-20s. The portion of the brain is critical to higher-order cognitive processes, such as impulse control, working memory, decision-making, planning, problem-solving, and emotional regulation. Long-term, regular use of cannabis, beginning in adolescence, is associated with long-term impairment in attention, memory, and verbal learning. Data collected by the Canadian Institute for Health Information shows that we must be concerned about this. Hospitalization for cannabinoid-related issues is on the rise. Between 2006 and 2011, hospitalizations increased by 44%, and this reflects only those instances that we are aware of. The 2016 task force approached the cannabis legalization a bit differently. In November, a briefing held for parliamentarians, the Honourable Anne McClellan, chair of the government's task force on legalization and regulation, said, "The task force did not approach the question as a matter of if or they should regulate cannabis. They approached it on how," which shows you the mindset of the government at the time, so they did not have to go through the possible dangers to come to perhaps a different recommendation. Nonetheless, the task force also noted more education and more consultation are needed. Senators, the government has simply not made the case for doing this. The gaps in the research, the harmful nature of cannabis, and the utter confusion on how to safely regulate and police this substance as a consumer product are recurring themes in cannabis debates going back more than 40 years. I've heard our colleagues address these issues, but I remain unconvinced. Moreover, I think Canadians remain unconvinced. While some polling indicates Canadians favor cannabis legalization, other polling shows that by and large, Canadians do not trust the cannabis industry with their safety. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Canadians have written to us individually and to our offices expressing their concerns about how this legislation will impact them and their communities. In pursuing legislation like this, the government is further cultivating a culture of permissiveness around drugs and intoxicating substances. The government closed these proposals in the language of reducing incarceration. But what we are really talking about is a government that wants to push massive social change on Canadians. The rush is incomprehensible. Within the space of a year, we have gone from debating supervised heroin injections to pushing cannabis use nationwide. I'm not sure Canadians want Canada to be known for its liberal drug laws. In a sense, this shift amounts to a form of social engineering that it has consequences for how we are perceived and how we perceive ourselves. With these issues in mind, we must be mindful of our constituents and represent them well by taking our time and giving C-45 the full examination and due diligence it demands. Thank you, Senators.
Good job. Are senators ready for the question? Senator Martin?
So I thought Senator Eaton was speaking to this. I move the adjournment to the debate.
Moved by the Honourable Senator Martin, second by the Honourable Senator Smith, that further debate be adjourned until the next sitting of the Senate. It's your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion. Adopt.